Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about transmedia storytelling. Now, if you're unfamiliar what this term means, it's essentially where you tell one story or kind of experience a story through multiple medias. It's actually something I've known about for a little while. I just never knew the exact term for it. I actually learned it fairly recently, like literally a couple of days ago. To kind of put it in perspective for you, kind of break it down a little bit more. Essentially, there's like a story, and that story continues in the form of other media. A great example of it, and it's kind of on a smaller scale, so to help understand, would be Final Fantasy 15. It's initially a game, but there's other stories told connected to that one story. That includes Kingsglaive, the CGI movie, as well as the anime Brotherhood. It's not necessarily side content, I guess. I guess another side of it could be considered that. It's actually kind of interesting too, because it doesn't fall under the same category, including like sequels and adaptations. I think they don't technically count. Like saying like a superhero movie, for example. Like obviously a lot of superhero stuff is initially a comic book that gets adapted into a movie. From what I was reading, that doesn't technically count as transmedia storytelling because it's an adaptation. Transmedia storytelling is like a great and larger example would be Star Wars, because a lot of the, like, obviously Star Wars exists in multiple facets. Obviously mainline stuff is the movies, but obviously it's existed as, you know, comic books, novels, animated TV shows, a lot of animated TV shows in fact. Essentially it's kind of like building out a universe more, telling these other stories. It's all part of one giant story and you're just kind of flushing it out. Like Star Wars kind of gets flushed out a lot in like those other media. You know, once again, this could be me misunderstanding things, but this is my understanding of it. Which that whole situation using Star Wars, for example, is interesting because obviously there's some stuff that is canon and there's some stuff that isn't canon. There's stuff that was canonical but it isn't canonical anymore, so it's kind of interesting. Like I said, so Star Wars is kind of on a lane all on its own just because there's so much to it. You know, so many avenues of which that story is being told, because it's not like I said, it's not like an adaptation of like, oh, these are the movies being adapted into these different media, whether it be video games, which I didn't even know that, but there are some video games that actually contain canon stuff, which is interesting to me. I don't know why, I find that fascinating. But these are like their own stories, but they're all connected to this larger story. Like obviously there's a lot to the Star Wars universe, so there's a lot of room you can make, which is also interesting because I talked about like sequels and adaptations don't really count, which is interesting considering the fact is a lot of like Star Wars includes sequels. But to be fair, I think it's also from the fact is that Star Wars is all over its timeline, so it's kind of a special case in that. I wonder why is that specific. Well, I guess maybe there are examples of stuff being adapted into sequels, into other forms, like something might start off as a movie and then there's a sequel TV show wise, I guess. So maybe that's kind of like the distinction they're trying to make. Some other examples I would say would be like Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry obviously starts off as a video game. You have the currently, you know, 5 main games in the series, but there's also novels connected, which I think some of the stuff in the novels is considered canon. There's other stuff that isn't. Like stuff I remember like reading little excerpts about online years ago. I think some of that's not necessarily canonical. There's some stuff that's come up about DMC5. I think maybe newer novels were released or something that fall into canon. Same thing for like the anime, because that's canonical now, I think, especially because there's stuff that pops up in DMC5 that's like, oh wait, that's from the anime. Because I use an example, there was something I remember reading about years ago that was connected to how Dante got ebony and ivory, but then there's a conversation later on in DMC5 that Nico's like, oh, like, what is she saying? Like her grandmother's the one that made ebony and ivory, I think. I don't know if that's combining those two. Like I said, that was something I read years ago, so that might have been them kind of falling back on some original canon that they had. Regardless, it's just kind of an interesting thing. Another one would probably be Nier Automata. Well, Nier and the Drakengard series, because apparently the whole Yukatara situation, apparently there are plays that are connected, that have story to them that is connected to these video games. I think there might also be novels connected, but I'm not sure. I definitely have heard about the plays. I will note, I'm not sure if they're adaptations or whether they're just kind of their own thing that just happen to have story connected to the Nier/Drakengard universe. So I'm not that familiar because I've only ever played the first Drakengard, and I know about Nier by proxy of like seeing and watching other people play it, so I've kind of absorbed it through osmosis. So I don't know, like to me it's such a fascinating way to tell a story, you know? I mean, because that way you're not limited to just one outlet, like, you know, because it's like, I mean, I feel like that's kind of an interesting way, because, well, I don't know, I think it's kind of an interesting way to kind of reach people out in a new medium. Like maybe there's certain things you can do in a video game that you wouldn't be able to do in a movie or a TV show or a comic book, you know, or vice versa, you know. And I think it gives you this outlet to kind of, you know, play around and kind of do other things and with this story that you might not have been able to do before, because a lot of stuff lends itself being in different artistic forms. You get what I'm trying to say? It's just such a fascinating thing. I don't know if it's ever going to be something where we see like a lot of stuff do it, because I feel like that'd be kind of hard to juggle that a lot. I mean, because you'd be in that situation of like, well, the fact is, I'm sure like in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to comic books and stuff like that, that might be from people who are fans of something. I'm sure there's like licensing and stuff to make it so it's like, oh yeah, you have permission to do all this stuff, but then you have to, you know, like I said, do with the Star Wars thing, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that's out there that is no longer considered canon. So it's like you'd have to kind of juggle all of that, whether it's like, oh yeah, here's some new information that came out in the form of a comic book. Is that canonical? Yes, no, maybe, you know, that type of thing. So I just think it's fascinating. I don't know you would necessarily see that kind of become like a mainstream thing. I guess you could make the argument that maybe the MCU is kind of heading in that direction in certain regards, because obviously it's always had like that TV show aspect to it, but obviously the TV shows and the movies have been disconnected, so I don't know if that necessarily would count, even though it technically takes place in the same universe. TV shows reference the movies to a slight extent, but obviously the movies never really reference the TV shows, you know. So but obviously with the Disney Plus situation, which I've talked about before, there's Marvel shows that are directly connected to the movies, so we might be stepping in that direction. That might be something they might plan to do with the MCU, is start doing it in a more transmedia storytelling form of like introducing new stories and characters through, you know, comic books or books, or which is interesting, you know, when you take something that's adapted into a comic book and then turn it back into a comic book, which is interesting that happened. I guess when you actually break it down, kind of going back to what I was saying before about kind of having to juggle all that, I guess like if you spread your story out like that too much, like I said, it becomes homework for a lot of people. Rather than putting everything in one basket, you kind of spreading it out like that. So it'd probably be like people like, I'm not really into comic books or video games, I only came to watch a movie, so now you're telling me I have to watch a movie, watch TV shows, play a video game, read a comic book, read a book to kind of fully understand everything. Once again, that's the whole situation of if you're into something enough, it's not homework. But if you're someone else that's trying to jump into something, maybe you feel like you know, so, I mean, that's also something too that like it can always end up being one-sided. Like there's stuff in the movies, like using Star Wars, for example. There's probably stuff in the movies they make wink and nod to like other canon that exists, whether it be comic books or books or video games, but they can't outright make it like a huge thing because, you know, not a lot of people will be aware of this particular thing. Like I said, I find the whole situation very interesting. Like I said, there's obviously pros and cons to the whole situation, and ultimately that leads me to my question that I kind of asked earlier. Would that be something that you would be interested in, like transmedia storytelling being a much bigger thing than it is? I mean, to be fair, maybe it is and I'm just not aware of it. These few examples that I brought up are the few that I'm the most aware of. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm very fascinated to hear other people's thoughts on this subject. Really, that's all I want to talk about today. Next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good